So the topic is towards civil politics, and our first speaker will be the Honorable Mark Henderson, who served in the Arizona House of Representatives, I think, for 12 years, and then in the state Senate for 2 years, and then retired from that and went back to the House for a total of 12 years. Our other speaker is Elva Coor, and Mrs. Coor has been involved in Arizona life from A to Z, her entire life. And her husband, Dr. Ronnie Coor, was the president of Arizona State University, as you all recognize. But Mrs. Coor is the power behind the throne, okay? And I always tell people that behind every successful man is a woman yelling, "Fool!" I don't think that's true here. But it's a great privilege for us to have Mark Henderson and Elva Coor today. So Mark will ask you to present first, and then after Mark speaks, we'll ask Mrs. Coor to speak, and then there'll be time for questions from anybody.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Good morning. Thank you for being here in this beautiful facility today. It's fabulous. It's full of history. You can just feel the kind of history of the city here. I'm going to be fairly brief, and Paul did mention that after the legislature, I actually was elected to the Justice of the Peace for West Mesa, so I'm a judge right now. So as a disclaimer, none of my comments today should be construed to reflect the judiciary of Arizona's opinion on any of these issues. It's simply my own personal opinion. A little tad bit more background. I did, as Paul mentioned, I did serve in the legislature. I was involved in a number of campaigns. And my talk this morning is going to sort of divide into two parts. Because you're talking about civility in politics, which is our topic. There's politics, there's the campaign aspect of politics, where you're out running around trying to get people to vote for you. And then there's the governing part of politics, where you're actually now trying to do something once you've been elected. So we kind of talk about sort of both aspects of that from a civility point of view. I ran 7 campaigns for the legislature, and I ran one campaign where I was a candidate for Congress in 2008, which I did not win. And then my last campaign, of course, was for Justice of the Peace. So I've done 9 of them, and I've had the good fortune to not have to run a negative campaign. I've never had to run a hit piece, do a hit piece on somebody. I've never had to do those phone calls. You get those anonymous robocalls that say, your opponent, kicks his dog and he has bad breath and all kinds of things like that that are so important. I've never actually had to do that, so I consider myself fortunate. But in 2008, I did go back to Washington, D.C. because as a candidate for Congress, you go back to the candidate school. And in my case, being a Republican, I went to the Republican National Committee candidate school for people from all over the country who are running for Congress, newbies that are wanting to get in there. And we got to meet, Karl Rove and John Boehner and all of your favorite folks who are kind of the political Illuminati Republican side. And I began to realize that people in Washington, especially in this kind of realm of politics, view things a little differently than you and I do about politics. They really perceive this whole thing as a sport. It's really a sport. And so it's about competition, it's about winning, and they really enjoy the whole combative, competitive aspect of it. That's what gives them the energy to get up in the morning, I guess, back there. And I discovered that it was kind of, not really my personal feeling about it. And so they look at it as rather than your message that you want to get out to the voters being, what is your message? It's more like, okay, we have to craft your message so that it fits and gets you the desired result, which is to get elected. So it doesn't matter what your real message is, it's what message we want to, craft for you. And your image also. It's not really about who you really are, it's how you want the voters to perceive you so that they will actually vote for you. And the thing that really gets them excited is when they can discover some dirt on your opponent. Because then they realize, okay, this is a weakness, we can exploit this, and they really get excited about that. And to me, that is not really the way I view that the founders had intended for our process of decision-making to unfold. And I would have to say, though, I think the same kind of mentality exists on both sides of the aisle. In certain strata of people back in Washington, and of course, even in Arizona, we have people who sort of subscribe to that feeling. But it's kind of disconcerting when the average voter is kind of turned off by negative campaigning and really doesn't enjoy seeing the negative ads and so forth. But the people that produce them, they really enjoy doing that. And for them, that's exciting. It's election day is like the Super Bowl for those folks back in Washington. So civility is not high on their list of values that they consider important when promoting their different candidates. And then, of course, you have another kind of issue, which is, you've all heard the saying, the mother's milk of politics is money. And certainly that is the case. People who have money, they want to feel relevant in politics. And so the way to feel relevant is to support candidates that win. So as people who are donors and so forth, you want to be donating your money to candidates that are going to win so that you can get a photo with the candidate and you can have access after the election a little bit and so forth. So there's a whole appeal to people to donate to candidates, and if you're the likely winner, then cash is going to flow in your direction. In my particular primary race, there were 6 of us running, and the one who ended up winning that particular race in 2008 was David Schweikert, and he ended up spending $1 million in the primary election. And then he spent another $1 million in the general election, and he still lost. And so in that particular race, I was outspent 9-1 in the primary. And even though I had a great experience campaigning, and I enjoyed so much meeting the people, I didn't enjoy the fundraising aspect of it. And so therefore, that's probably one primary reason that I didn't win. But what I did enjoy were the debates, because in the debates we had 6 different candidates, and people would ask questions about the issues, and you could talk about the issues and so forth. And I remember very clearly in the debates, civility was very important, and people conducted themselves very civilly in the debates. And in fact, each debate, I proposed that all of the candidates run a totally positive campaign. And I said, the reason is because we want these voters not to be turned off by all the negative back and forth. We want them to turn out in the general election. So we're all good candidates here. Let's run a positive campaign and show that it can actually be done. And so, of course, during the debate, the audience all applauded and all the candidates agreed. Of course, as soon as the debate was over, several of the candidates ran out to the TV station to run their hit piece TV commercials. And so it didn't really work. And so it turned out, as most elections do, to be kind of a war between several candidates who had the most money, who could put the most TV commercials, and who had consultants from Washington giving them guidance on how to run their campaign. And it'll be the same this year. I'm sure we're all looking forward to the presidential campaign this year. Mr. Romney and Mr. Obama, we're going to see obviously a lot of negative TV commercials and so forth. And the ironic thing about it is that, and this is just my personal opinion, both Mr. Romney and President Obama are fine people. Individually, as far as their character, their quality as people, they're both incredible. good people, but they are not in charge of the election. They are not the ones who decide how this election is going to go. It's the professional people, the consultants, the donors, and the pundits, and now the super PACs are the ones who are in charge of the election. So even though you can be a person of sterling character, you're going to find yourself seeing commercials on TV that are put out by your team that are totally, really horrible commercials. And you're kind of stuck with it. The candidates don't really run the campaigns. They don't really determine the flavor and the tone. And oftentimes even the message of the campaigns is largely determined by other people, professional election and political people. So that's kind of discouraging. But on a hopeful note, I want to encourage you not to buy into what you're going to hear this year, which is, oh my gosh, this is the worst campaign in history. This is the most negative political campaign that we've ever had in the United States. We're going down the drain because of this negative stuff. That's what we hear, if you recall, every single election. And it began in 1800. With the election between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, which if you're a student of history, you won't remember it personally, except for Paul, maybe. But that election was so bad, and the vitriol and the accusations makes our elections today seem quite tame by comparison. And there was a number of these kind of nasty elections throughout history. Ulysses S. Grant against Horace Greeley was particularly bad. Grover Cleveland against James Blaine in 1884 was a memorable one because the James Blaine supporters had this chant that they would chant at different rallies. They wanted to remind the voters that Grover Cleveland had fathered a child out of wedlock and they had an illegitimate child. And so they had a saying that said, or a chant that went, "Mom, Mom, where's my paw? Mom, Mom, where's my paw?" And that was what they chanted to remind people this sort of weakness, if you will, of Grover Cleveland. Well, as we all know, Grover Cleveland won the election in spite of that, and so his supporters had a chant after the election that said, "Mom, Mom, where's my paw? Gone to the White House, ha, ha, ha." So, as you can see, politics has always been a realm where civility has not always been the highest virtue involved. Let's see where we're at. Oh. Okay, now let me just switch gears a little bit into the civility involved in governing. Because once you get elected, then you're actually supposed to do something. And that's called governing. And I was going to explain the whole process about how an idea becomes an actual law and what you have to go through to get that done. But that would be another hour. And so I don't think I'm going to go there. But I'll just say the conclusion of that is that an individual person in a legislative process cannot get anything done by themselves. Every step along the way involves the cooperation of other people, it involves working together with other people, compromising, taking other people's interests into your concern, and so forth. So that process is not about individuals and just one person being able to accomplish anything. So you have to be, in order to be effective, you have to be able to have good relationships with other people. And I found when I was there that kind of a simple way to operate was to treat other legislators with respect. And I found that in most cases, what would happen is that they would treat you with respect. And it seems kind of obvious, I think something called the golden rule that we've heard of here in this organization before. But I found that that's how you can be the most effective, is you have to set that bar of treating people with respect. And just recently we've seen in the news, of course, the last week or so, one of our legislators had to resign because he was going to be expelled, and primarily by members of his own party, and primarily because he was simply not treating other people with respect. And so there is a mechanism to deal with the sort of individual kind of rogue member, but that's not really the problem. Individual people who have their own challenges. It's really more about the system, and that's where the civility issue kind of breaks down, is because you have a two-party system. And in a two-party system, the way ours is designed, it's designed based on conflict, competition. There's winners and there's losers. And it's really a form of warfare where you don't use guns and bullets, but you use votes and ballots and press releases and other mechanisms to try to defeat the other side. So sort of automatically, when you're on one team in a sporting event, and you're going against another team, only one team is going to win, and so you try to defeat the other team. So in politics, it's the same thing. In the legislature, you're trying to defeat the other team, you're trying to discredit them, you're trying to promote, obviously what you're trying to do. And so the system is automatically going to lead to some incidences of where there's a lack of civility. And so our challenge today, and why Paul and Arizona Interfaith have us here, is to try to figure out, is there anything we can do to try to promote, to encourage, or to bring about greater civility so that there's more of a cooperative effort in terms of self-governance as opposed to the conflict-driven self-governance that we see so much of these days. So I'm going to float two ideas to you this morning, just real quickly, and you'll probably throw both out, and probably rightfully so. But just for the sake of discussion, some ideas I came up with were, first of all, you could make political parties illegal. Okay, I got one fan of that. There you go. Okay, if you make political parties illegal, each individual person who wanted to run for office could form their own political action committee. They could raise their own funds for their campaign instead of pooling together with a bunch of other like-minded people. And that way, you wouldn't have the situation where you find yourself in when you're a member of a party, that you have to be responsive to the people who are kind of running the party. And we have a system in Arizona, as most states do, of a primary. And primary, the people who mostly tend to get out and vote are the more either conservative members on the one side or the more liberal members on the other side. So your candidates tend to generally be from those more extreme sides of the political aisle because they have to get through the primary to make it to the general election. So if you get rid of that whole system and you say, okay, individuals just run based on your own personal qualifications, you don't have to say, I'm this or that, here's what I believe. And there are some downsides to this, and the one I'll quickly mention before I get on here is if you did that, people who are wealthy would have a very distinct advantage in that case as candidates. Now, you still have political campaign laws that prevent, in Arizona, at least on the state level, of large donors giving one candidate $100,000 or something like that. But they could give themselves that. So you could find yourself that a lot of wealthy people would be running for office because they could fund their own campaign, and that might skew who you actually have representing you at the state level to some extent. Okay, the second idea is if you change the law to where any measure in the legislature in order to pass would require a 2/3 vote, then in most cases you don't have one party with more than 2/3. And so therefore they have to cooperate together to get anything done. Now if you just have a majority, you don't really even need to listen to the other party. All you have to do is make sure all your members are on the team, and you can pass anything you want. So this would then encourage a lot more interaction because you would need to get votes from the other side. And so therefore, you'd have to come to more consensus type positions. Now, of course, the downside would be you might actually do absolutely nothing, which I don't know if that's a downside or not, but that could happen. And the other downside would be you could get a small minority of people, 1/3 plus 1, who could say, we're not going to vote for anything unless you do what we want. So you have kind of, in that sense, a rule by minority because they have the power to stop anything. And so there's a downside to that proposal. Let me just sum up by saying there's no simple solutions, there's no quick fixes that I can come up with today. So perhaps our focus should really be more on a long-range solution to the problem. I think Ms. Coor will probably get into a lot of that in more detail. But here's my proposal for the long-range solution. Parents, churches, schools should all teach and promote the golden rule so the children could learn to practice civility every day until it became ingrained in their view and in the way they acted. And so these children would then become the future leaders of our country. They would all be golden rule people. Their example would then transform other people, and this would have a ripple effect even beyond the borders of our country. So in conclusion, what we need is we need a nonprofit organization of dedicated people to work to educate others and promote the application of the golden rule as the best way to ensure civility in society and government. Does anyone know where we can find that type of education?
Left, how much I should pay for that blood. Our next speaker is Mrs. Elva Coor. Besides everything that she's done throughout her life, at this point, she is the chairwoman of the Senator O'Connor House Voter Engagement Project. I have the privilege of serving on that committee, and it's an exciting committee under the leadership of Mrs. Coor. So, Elva.
Thank you, Paul. And thank you, Mark, for setting this up for me. What you said is just perfect. I love your long-range plan because it is about creating a culture shift of some sort. I think media has a lot to do with where we are today. This idea that everybody always on television and talks over each other. We're setting such a horrible example. And you mentioned so many things. I started, I'm really just a cowgirl. And that's part of, I guess, why Senator O'Connor and I got involved in this. We met about 54 years ago when we were young Republicans. I'm just a little younger than her, but not much. And she still will call me at 6 o'clock in the morning and say, okay, Elva, we have to talk. She said, we've got big problems in the state, and we've got to see if there's something we can do about it. And she said, and I know you're up, and I know you can get things done because you're a cowgirl. And we don't wait for the perfect opportunity when things are broken. You use that wire or whatever is handy, and you fix it because you can't count on anybody else to do it. So that's kind of why I'm here. She has a way with words, and she has made several of those calls, and that inspired some of us to move her house, where so many of the things that you were talking about, where Republicans and Democrats came to her home to solve problems. When she was in the legislature in the early, I guess it was late 60s, early 70s, and that was partly in the Burton Bar Alfredo Gutierrez days, which many of you might remember, where they had very opposing views, but they worked together and they got things done, and they made some big things happen in Arizona. But when they would get to a point where the Republicans and Democrats couldn't talk to each other, she'd say, okay, this is when she was majority leader at the Senate. She'd say, I want everybody to come to my house at 6:30, and I'll have some dinner, and then we'll resume the conversation. And in her words, she'd make chalapas or something easy to fix and buy some beer. And she said people would come into her adobe home, a very simple adobe home, representative of the adobe home she grew up on in Southern Arizona. And she said they would walk through that door and they'd pick up the beer and everybody would start talking. it was informal. You were out of the chambers, you were on one side or the other. And she said, you cannot imagine the legislation that we were able to come to agreement on just because of that informal, shake hand, let's just talk, let's don't be Republicans and Democrats, let's just talk and let's identify what's wrong and let's figure out how to fix it. When I worked for Barry Goldwater, it was my first job out of high school. I can remember, spending hours in the Senate galleries listening to a pretty full Senate. They didn't talk to the television in those days. They talked to each other, and people really showed up for votes, and they were there, they lived there. They weren't just there 2 days a week. 2.5 days is about the average now. And they became friends. And I can remember Barry Goldwater and Hubert Humphrey, and we had some very opposite kinds of opinions, but they always addressed each other with the distinguished senator, please allow me to express my views on that topic. I beg to disagree. And it was all very simple. It was really, it is so different than what we see today. We still had conflict and mistruths spoken in campaigns, but it's still, you could get a Republican or Democrat at a campaign rally and you could have a civil conversation. I think one of the biggest differences then is it was not a sport. It was that people really wanted to do things. Barry Goldwater and Carl Hayden talked every day. He talked every day with Stuart Udall, later Wall. And they were just as helpful as talking with John Rhodes, who was Republican. They all wanted to get water to Arizona. There were a lot of big issues that were facing Arizona that the state itself could not do. And they didn't put cute little tags like earmarks on it. It was what was useful for Arizona. So that is kind of a long way of saying I agree with what you're saying. So what is O'Connor House trying to do? Working with the justice, we decided, where is it better when I talk? Is it out here? Is that the best? When we started, we decided to move the house. The justice felt very strongly that it can't just be a house. It had to mean something. It had to be a symbol of something. And it took us about a year to come up with a vision. Our vision is to be a place where let me see that I'm getting the wrong place here. The vision inspired by the justice is to create an Arizona where important policy decisions affecting our future are made through a process of civil discussion, critical analysis of facts, and the informed participation of all citizens. And to that end, we started out with a policy group that the justice asked us to put together, a small group of people that were consistently working with the legislature and faced roadblocks having to do with a lot of different issues. We brought about 100 people together from around the state because our position is not that we should form policy or we should decide what the policies are, but that people with divergent views should come together to discuss the problems and find solutions. So we brought about 100 people together. We selected a Republican and a Democrat that had been in the Senate, Jennifer Burns and Mike Hamer, which were both kind of center-right and center-left. And we're now, they just threw up their hands and didn't run again. But they were very, very helpful and helped us identify people around the state with divergent views, cattlemen and environmentalists, labor, business, whatever it was, you had the opposite person. I would love a drink. I get very, very thirsty if I can have a little glass of water. I should have grabbed a bottle, but I just didn't. Thank you. And together they came up with about 20 things that they felt were systemic problems in Arizona. One of them, for instance, was terminals, which had very good intentions, that's the way you got rid of people. When in fact you can get rid of people if you vote, which is where I'm headed. What's happened, though, is you don't have any institutional memory anymore. The stories I hear from people that are trying to communicate with members of the legislature. I mean, one of them the other day, talking to the League of Cities and Towns on some issue, said, well, why don't we just pass an ordinance? States don't pass ordinances, cities pass ordinances. But I hear over and over problems like this. It takes time to learn how to handle a complex government. You don't just run for office on some issue and become an expert. You know, it takes a long time. And some of our ministers served many, many years. So that was one thing that happened. But what happened was, we also were going to tackle the initiative system, which is an honorable system, but misused. People often don't know what they're voting for. They're worded in a way that you think you're voting yes means this, and in fact it means just the opposite. So we were proposing a way to not name them but number them, so you couldn't be misled by a title, and to thank you very much. I guess this is part of old age, because this is a constant problem. But there were two, we got one initiative passed and one referendum, and two of the referendums were passed because the majority, the president of the Senate decided that we had votes. And when I say we don't have votes, there was a C4 that was committed to advancing the recommendations of the people that we brought together. And that they adjourned the day before, and that those two votes were going to occur. But there were a lot more problems with it. It became very clear to us that in today's environment, it's very difficult to get a lot of much needed legislation passed. So when the the Center for the Future decided to have a ballot poll, that was the most in-depth poll, by the way, ever done in the state of Arizona or ever done by a ballot poll, to find out what Arizonans really wants. Who are Arizonans? Who is the average Arizonan? What we found out is that there's an incredible disconnect between elected officials and the voters. We found that only 10% of the voters in Arizona, citizens, not necessarily just voters, believe their elected officials represent their views. 10%. So how does that happen? When we also found out that Arizonans agree on much more than they disagree, and you would not know that sometimes at the legislature. But we also learned that two of the weaknesses in Arizona had to do with civic engagement. First of all, Arizonans are more connected and attached to Arizona than people in most states are to their state, the beauty, the weather, etc. So they're very attached, but they don't feel connected to their neighbors. They do not feel that their neighbors care about them. Now, you know, the people that I talk to all feel very engaged. That's why you're here. You're engaged and you're interested. But most don't. And so we started thinking, so how can we do something about civic engagement? When the Arizona Civic Health Index came out, we learned some startling facts. We learned that, and I've got handouts for you later if you want, we found that 31% of the people in 2008 were not registered. 31% not even registered. We found that 42% of the eligible voters didn't vote, and that's eligible, that's not just registered. And typically, 78% of voters in Arizona do not vote in the primary. 78% don't vote. Well, to us, that sort of set off that what we can do is to stimulate civic engagement by focusing this first year on voting. And we set out to determine how to do that. And Mark led into that very nicely. Because what we are doing, we started bringing nonprofits and cities and towns and other individuals together to see how do we begin a statewide conversation to get everybody talking about voting and being informed voters. It's one thing to vote, it's another thing to know what you're voting for. So many people vote for one issue, but they have no clue what the candidate is going to vote for on other issues, and so later they find out that they really don't like that candidate, even though they voted on that one issue, and so he feels disenfranchised. So after several months and meeting with 60 or 70 nonprofits and other organizations, and these were umbrella nonprofits that represent a lot of other nonprofits, cities and towns, some members of the faith community, schools were a big group that we invited, all kinds of organizations, businesses, and together we decided that we would really work to form a statewide collaboration. The O'Connor House's method of working is to convene groups, often with divergent views, to stimulate collaboration and to catalyze the energy that's created with that. So that's what we've done. We now have, if everybody that is engaged with us right now would do what they have said they would do, we would be reaching every citizen several times. We don't want to just hear what we have to say several times. We want everybody to hear it over and over through the churches. So thank you, Mark, for that too. Their places of worship, through the schools, talking to parents and children, like we got smoking changed because teachers would talk to the children about the sins of smoking and the dangers of smoking, and kids would go home and, Mommy, I don't want you to die, please quit smoking. And a lot of things changed, recycling was changed because of that. So what we have right now is a network of people, and we would like to invite the participation of all of you and whatever organizations that you're involved with, or people that are individuals, to join us in this effort. So in every church, every synagogue, every place of worship would, for the next few months, talk about voting and being informed and mean it and really push. We could start a conversation that would allow us then to take advantage of teams that we're building all over the state, from churches, schools, Girl Scouts are involved. This is now a project that is where Girl Scouts can participate for their Gold Award. We have the National Charity League, there are mothers and daughters, there's a center with mothers and sons, there's Boy Scouts, we've got Seratos, we've got the League of Cities and Towns, we've got just in the nonprofit world, one of them has 650 nonprofits, and they have 21,000. We have the American Association of Community Managers, which we think of as homeowner associations. They came to us, they said, we want to start building communities. We don't want to just be property managers, and we would like to participate. So we have all of that going, and we'll keep building. But in several of the most populous counties right now, we've actually got teams. We're already getting registration. And they're not our teams, they're the teams of Cottonwood, Sedona, and Prescott, and every town, literally, in Pinal County, and quite a few in Maricopa and Pima. But our view is that unless we get everybody talking about it, everybody to understand, get civics back in our school. Sadly, a few years ago, we learned from a survey that only a third of our children, and she meant under 30, that could name the 3 branches of government. So how do you build a democracy? We're at something like 139 in the world of democracies in terms of voting, and I think there's less than 200 democracies. I forgot the number. I keep forgetting to look it up again. But we're 139. I mean, how can America be there? And that is really the underscoring thing that we have to change. We need to find ways to become informed, to have civil dialogue, and we're working with a number of people. A young woman by the name of Andrea Hoshar, who teaches philosophy of the public interest in NAU, and she does what she has what she calls compassionate compassionate conversations, and her focus is compassionate listening. And so what's compassionate listening? What it is just like what Mark said, it's respecting and really hearing what the other person's point of view is. In our society right now, the minute you say you're a Republican, by God, I'm a Democrat, we're going to argue about it. And we don't stop and say, how did you get there? You know, what's the basis for your views? We don't say that. We just argue, and I say you're bad, you say I'm bad. And, you know, it's a very bad situation. The other thing, though, what she does, she's leading conversations all over the Flagstaff, and she gets over 100 at a time, and she's having a couple a week. And the rule is you cannot try to convince somebody of your point of view. You can't argue. What you have to do is listen and really care about what that other person's saying and really try to learn from it. And I'm finding it very, very powerful. And I'm even using it in some of the places where I talk, and suddenly we'll get people to say, well, you ought to do this, and you know, they complain, and we don't want a lot of complaining. We say that's not what we're here for. We're all a little bit angry. What we want to do is to try to do something about it, and we'd like you to join us. Well, she's doing that in just a brilliant way. And what happens, and I've experienced it in 2 meetings, where two very opposing people with very opposing views after the meeting were talking. And one time it just happened to be the Republican leader and the Democrat leader, and from what I understand, they've now agreed to go out and work together in a county that I know well and has a lot of polarization going on. But it was just stopping and thinking about, yeah, we're not getting anywhere. So that's what our project is all about. We want people to open their minds to be informed. We're not going to tell people or try to sway views. We feel that if we all open our minds and are respectful of other views, that we will learn. We will provide sites, we're working on websites that will show and give information about issues from different points of view. You know, ideally center right, center left, that's really based on ballot research and not just some radio program, you know, where somebody's shouting opinions. It's more about, you know, where you get your facts and what's the truth and what are the consequences, etc. So that's, so we are going to be doing that, but we're going to always have 2 points, at least 2 points of view. We want to become the place where you can trust the information to be valid and honest. Over and over in the state we're here, that people don't know who to trust. Where do we go to get information? I mean, who can tell me what any of the candidates today really believe? You know, I've just listened to all the debates. I want to vote for somebody. But I honestly don't know what any of them are really going to do. You know, they're going to get jobs, solve the problems, but we never hear a plan. You know, and the other guys cost it. You know, that's the issue. So we're hoping to try to encourage people at the local level to work on learning even how to ask questions in a way that a candidate can't skirt around it. And there's a lot of ways you can do that. So there's a lot of work to do, and I won't go on and on about it, but we're getting amazing results. We're getting 50, 60, 70 people at a meeting, and I'm just quite astonished at how many people are just looking for some way to help get us out of this very uncivil situation.
Thank you very much. Now, in our group today is Mr. David DeRozier. Mark, in his closing remarks, said we've got to work on really the golden rule, etc., etc. I've got a folder here for Mr. DeRozier, and the top line in his political process here says, live the golden rule. So, David, I'd like to invite you to respond to anything that Mark or Mrs. Coor said. Sorry to start on you off that.
Thank you, Rob.
And your thing, your brochure here says, Republican candidate for Arizona State Legislature.
do redistricting over 10 years, as you all probably know, and this is our time to do that. 28 is actually for Central Phoenix. It's part of what's now 6, 7, 10, and 11. I carved it up, and it runs from Union Hills to Thomas, Scottsdale Road to I-17 with various pieces cut out in between. Anybody that's currently in 7 can go online and take a look at and donate, sign a nominating petition, so forth. Anybody in 6, 7, 10, or 11, according to Secretary of State, can sign nominating petitions and so forth. The reason that I chose to run was that I had been a lawyer for 35 years in Arizona, and I had been told by many judges, not just to me personally, but as I heard them speak in various places, that there's various things that they are required to do because that's what the statute requires them to do, even though they don't want to do it. So that was one of the reasons. The other one was, frankly, I have learned a lot through this organization. A lot of things that I didn't know before, especially about the variety of religious groups around the world that have the golden rule. And one of the things that happened with my growth spiritually over the years was I learned what the real definition of compassion is and how to live it. And I'm not, when I talk to my political consultant, he says these are the major points, like Mark was saying, and you got to curtail to those major points. And I said, he said, what do you think about this one? And I says, I don't agree with it. Don't agree with it. So I've got a problem, okay, already from the get-go with my internal guidance system, if you will, and being willing to listen to people that say, I got to do this if I'm going to get elected. I'm not going to do that. Can't do that. It's inconsistent with who I am. Okay, so I'm probably not going to win. Okay? But I'm certainly going to try. I don't believe that I'm stuck with anything except with who I am and what I believe that we ought to be able to do. My maternal grandfather told me when I was about 6, 7, 8 years old, always tell the truth. Remember what you said, number one. Number two, if you don't have anything nice to say about people, don't say anything at all. So I'm not going to be part of that process. And it may well be that I can't make it because I have friends that are Democrats that are going to vote for me. I have friends that are independent that changed from Democrat to independent so they can vote for me. I've been around this valley for a long time. I know a lot of people. Unfortunately, a lot of my people that I know and we've worked with over the years. One illustration, I worked with a lot of people who were molested as children, both again, by their own family members and their own, and people that were in power over them, like priests and so forth. And one of the things that struck me when doing that was that those people can get well if you have enough compassion to stay with them long enough for them to heal. Okay? But they had what they call flashbacks. Okay? And flashbacks is something some of us might not know what they are, but it really is a nightmare that's in the daytime. Okay? And you suddenly start remembering those traumatic events. And we sometimes label that in psychology as PTSD. Okay? But the only thing that heals is love. Okay? The only thing that heals is love. So you keep loving those people. You see it in your animals at home, dogs. You bring in one from a rescue mission. Okay? And say that the dog, after a while, that dog loves you. So that's my message. Thank you, Paul. Okay. Thank you very much.
Now then, anyone have any questions toward Mark or Mrs. Coor?
First of all, one of the problems of our wonderful suggestion to get rid of political parties is that it's unconstitutional, because there's a certain thing in the First Amendment that says people have a right to assemble. So I think that might be a little unconstitutional. Let me ask you, what do you think both of you would happen if there was better civics education in school, for one, and also if maybe we would get rid of things like, not rid of, but find ways to maybe cut down C-SPAN, Arizona Capital Television, things of this nature where it seems to me like politicians are more intent on putting on a show than they are about doing something. A couple random thoughts.
Civic education.
Okay, yeah. There have been efforts over the years to try to beef up the kind of civic education and sort of history and so forth in Arizona schools. I do know that our current superintendent, Hubenthal, is very much an advocate of that. And so, and in fact, the former superintendent was as well. But, you know, you have local control is a big value in Arizona, especially regarding the schools. And so, even though we violated it all the time, we somewhat hesitated to actually pass a law that says you have to do so much civic education and so on, because it really is a local control issue in terms of the curriculum that schools provide and so forth. But I do know there is an awareness of that and how important it is, and I think we could do a better job. But I'm not sure we have local control, how much the state can impose certain curriculum and so forth on the schools. And I'm not sure that's the best way to do it. I agree, and I think probably everybody would agree, we want our kids to learn history and to learn the importance of being a citizen, being involved in government. So,
Well, I'll stick to civic education part a little bit. John Hubenthal has assigned somebody, John Blankenship, to work with us on this idea of working through the schools, and they're very excited about that. What's really happened with civic education is, first of all, there's been many years of tax cuts, and of course, education always gets its bumps on that. That's part of the problem. But the other part is that as the money rightfully has moved to math and science, because if you really want a high-tech environment and high-paying jobs, you have to have math and science. But what's happened is that money has moved out of other kinds of things like civics, which there's a load I've placed on it. Yet really the states can, several states have now begun to increase civic education, because there was a recent study that showed that there was a correlation between poor civic education and crime. I don't know how valid it is, but that was a recent thing. So if you don't respect and understand the country, you're not going to function very well, and you're not going to vote, et cetera, et cetera. I know Texas and Sandra, some years ago, when she heard about this, how few people can name the three branches of government, inspired a project called iCivics. She said kids like video games, so let's create a bunch of video games that deal with how government works. Today there's 15 video games, and I would encourage you to all try it. There's a lot of people our age doing it because it's kind of stimulating, and even we all learn a little bit. But you can go in and become a member of the board of supervisors and plan where your roads are going to be to stimulate growth, and then you have to decide which taxes you're going to use to pay for, and it's going to be a bond election, and it gives you a little voter approval rating. So it's really particularly president. You can argue Supreme Court cases. You can be a legislator, but it causes you to understand the complexity of government and what the impact it makes. It's not liberal, it's not conservative. It's just kind of here are the facts and here's what you have to do. So we can get it back. One of the things we're working on is try to get it into the schools, and some have already started to put more energy into that. And some of the after-school programs are adopting or trying to stimulate civics, and some of the colleges students are trying to stimulate it by teaching kids how and encouraging them to play these games. So we think that will have some part. You have another part to your question.
It's just the general impact of the media, because it seems to me like an awful lot of this is about putting on a show and trying to be more radical than the other guy or whatever, just because it is a show.
I'd like to ask a question. How do you feel that the media has a positive impact overall on our children and our society.
What's your question?
How many of you, just raise your hands if you really like the way the trend of media today, and to be confronted and, you know, I mean, have arguments on television instead of, I mean, do any of you?
I'd like to respond to that if I can.
Okay.
I think that there are, among the media, and there are, I mean, we have a lot of media, a lot of different media, and there are places where one can get a balanced view of things, where, I mean, if you watch, and I'm just going to express a bias here, I watch public, the only news I watch is the PBS news. Whenever there's a topic being talked about, there are always at least two people who are there to respond to the issues. They don't pick a topic and just get one person to express their opinion. My bias in that respect extends to not watching anything else. I do not listen to talk radio. I'm a psychologist by training, and I began to think about this when I had patients over the last 5 years who would say things to me like, I can't go to sleep at night after I listen to Rush Limbaugh, or after I listen to Fox News. Part of my bias is it always seems to be people who listen to stuff, it's more on the right than on the left. Maybe because there's a lot more on the right than there is on the left. But at any rate, I'm willing to consider that there are people on the left who are just as nutty as a lot of these folks are. But I began to say to people, here's my suggestion. Why don't you do an experiment where you don't watch those things, where you don't listen to those radio stations? Simply don't listen to them. And the first response I often got was, well, I can't get that. How am I going to know what's going on? Well, that was very hard for me to stay away from expressing an opinion. You're not going to find out what's going on by listening to those things. You need someplace. And if it's not in the, maybe it's in the print media, it's not in radio and television.
Right.
You can read an article that's written by somebody that puts a balanced view in it. So to respond directly to your question, I do think that it's possible to get a balanced view, but one has to almost be a student of the media to do that. You have to sample and try out and judge for yourself. Am I getting an honest view? Am I getting the kind of breadth I want? And if you're not, then we probably ought to go somewhere.
And you're right, you can, but I think, and I won't belabor all of that, but overall, what we hear is that people are not happy and people are upset. That just, there's a lot of over-talking. It's not very civil. You know, there's not, NPR is very civil. Few more. But I think that there's hope with groups like the University of Arizona's Institute for Civil Discourse, which is a national move, and it looks like we're going to take on media in terms of trying to get them to add value to our lives in deeper ways and to be examples of civility in a way that doesn't occur much today.
Okay, yes, Jim?
Hi there. Well, I guess a couple of comments, a suggestion, and a question, I guess. First of all, I just want to claim that, like at an AA meeting, I'm a Democrat. So I want to claim that since there is one here anyway, so I want to let you know that. So, but secondly, I want to thank Mark especially. I like both your talks, but you said something, and I want to say you added to the discourse immediately. One of the things that upsets me so much, and it really would upset me about who's the president, but I have never heard a president referred to so much in my life as only by their last name as our current president. And you said President Obama, and I said President Bush, and I say President Obama because it goes with the respect for the office, and I thank you. I think those that kind of language helps set the table for the kind of discourse that we want to have. I grew up in a Republican state, but we had, in fact, we just lost. They had two of the kind of people we were talking about, a Democrat senator and a Republican senator that were both centrists. The Democrat, after the last time, said, I'm not running anymore, I can't stand it. And that was Evan Bayh. And poor Richard Lugar is now being challenged by conservative elements in his own party. And he's been a senator forever, but a moderate in the Midwest. So that's my couple of comments. My suggestion is I'm the lead pastor of the United Methodist Church in Mesa, downtown Mesa. And my suggestion is that one of the things that we struggle with, not all of us, but some of us struggle with, is I'm a disabled veteran, but I understand I never put together the church and my country in the same mold. So preaching at the 4th of July is always a challenge. And so I have a suggestion, and that maybe as part of your campaign, you might suggest to churches that they use that 4th of July time as a time to talk about this very topic that you were talking about and switch to the importance of discourse for all of us. And so that's just a suggestion. And the final thing, the question is, tell me anything that I can do in my leadership role to help what you're trying to accomplish, because I would like to know more about that. So.
Well, that's terrific, and that's exactly the attitude that we're all looking for. We have Republicans and Democrats in every team that we have, and we're trying to get some meetings at Mesa where we had a little hard time.
Come on down.
So I want you to give your card, sign you up. We don't care what party you are, and we don't care what religion, what color, or anything else. We care about just getting everybody engaged and stimulated, helping them understand they need to be informed and be engaged. And people are happy when you're engaged. Yes?
Do you have anybody from the Archive School of Journalism?
Actually, we've got some students that have come in working with us from Cromwell. They're just terrific. And we've also got a project that looks like it's going to happen with the Amish College over at ASU. All three of the universities' student associations are all very much involved.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Yes?
Yeah, I would just make a comment. I really appreciate what I heard today. Sorry, I wasn't here following. But the discourse, the uncivil discourse that goes on, I think is costing us a good legislator in Arizona, and it's Cecil Ash, who is not turned out, is not seeking re-election, but instead pursuing the justice of the peace. And simply because fighting battle is, as difficult as it is for us to listen to it, it's even difficult to participate in it. That's the tale.
Well, his example was one of the legislators who's currently a legislator who's not going to run again, Cecil Ash, who is a very fine person who actually replaced me when I didn't really get to that. And he's going to run for justice of the peace. See, the thing about justice of the peace, you don't have to put up with that. You can just find people in contempt and get that security guard arrested. But no, I think that, politics, even in the state level, you have to have a pretty thick skin. That's really the only qualification to be a legislator. And if you don't have it, if you're not able to handle all of the negativity, you probably won't really enjoy being there very much. You kind of have to let it roll off you and focus everything on the positives that you can try to get done. Not everybody's suited for that. I'm sure a lot of people told me I would not want to be an elected official because it does take a certain kind of personality to enjoy it. And Cecil's a great guy, and he'll be good at that as a judge.
Okay, good questions. Yes?
I grew up in Massachusetts. I grew up in Massachusetts. I think I'm the only one that my family or friends have both gone. So over the years, it's been just a lot of contentious arguments, political arguments. And I'm really interested to hear how, you mentioned the compassionate listening, but how to mitigate, how to change this argumentative mode into something a little bit more constructive and pleasant.
That is the big question, is how do you change it? And what we're hoping to do is to develop trainers around the state that will help people learn how to lead a discussion without forcing people to come to consensus. And I know eventually we want to come to consensus, but we're exploring the idea of the first thing is to learn to become respectful listeners and see what you can learn from the other person. And it isn't going to be easy. It's going to take everybody in this room and everybody in this state wanting that, and I think everybody does want it when they really think about it. Does that answer your question? There's all kinds of civil discourse groups, and we're looking at possibly putting a lot of them together and to say, how do we work together? We think collaboration, you know, with all these nonprofits, all of these organizations doing wonderful work, but they're all doing wonderful work in a lot of different directions. If there's one thing that they agree upon, and that is creating an informed and civil electorate, an engaged electorate, if all of us are working on that one layer together, we think that we can get a culture shift. And I didn't even think of that, but as we started talking and planning, people would say, you're looking at kind of almost a movement, that culture shift is what I think, a culture-driven study. But it's going to take everybody, and it ain't going to happen overnight. This year is just a great year to pull things together because people are unhappy. And it is a centennial year, and it is a presidential year. So it's a great time to get everybody thinking. And you can help.
Okay, I don't see that any other hand. Yeah.
I have one other thought, the nonprofit that Mark mentioned, you know, obviously we have the one we're in. But I've been going down the street looking at license plates and trying to pick out how many people have the Golden license plate. Okay, I've got one on one of my vehicles, I should have one on more. But anyway, I'm wondering if we have access through our organization to all of the people that have the license plates in the state. And if so, maybe that would be a way to expand what we're trying to do and get some more of this stuff that we're all talking about.
Yeah. I'm not aware that we have those names because the motor vehicle department sells them
Right.
to the individuals, and we don't have a list of those people at this time.
I was aware of that, but I looked a little bit into if there's any way to access it. Okay, so I didn't know, for example, that the organization gets a part of the money that's paid for until recently. Okay, so it's stimulating the organization if we'll all do that. So if nothing else, I'm saying go out and buy a license plate.
Yeah, well, you know, for all of you, whether it's Arizona Interfaith movement or Should Hurt to Be a Child or ASU alumni or anything like that, the state produces the license plates and sells them for $25. The state keeps $80 and gives the organization $17 for license plate. So that's not very much money until you multiply it by, I think we've got close to 40,000 license plates. And the beautiful thing about it is, no matter how bad the economy gets, you've got to have a license plate on your car, and you've got to renew it every year. So it's a great benefit to all the non-profit organizations.
We were able to defeat that bill.
Yes.
Want to take that away then?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. At least so far.
Yeah.
And a couple of our members have contacted various senators, and they have said, we will kill it. It cannot go forward. So, just to let you know, there was a bill that was proposed 2 or 3 months ago to take away the spatial license plates, should there be a child, ASU alumni, Golden Rule, etc. Okay, let me just say, first of all, let's thank Mark. They're both very, very busy, but thank you for coming and giving us your input and your wisdom on this issue. Now, Mrs. Coor has items to brochures to pass out, so she'll have them up here. Dave, you have the Gandhi brochures.
I do.
Oh, okay, they're over here. Yes, yes. This weekend, Mr. Narayan Desai from India, whose father was a personal assistant to Gandhi, and this man is 88 years old now, and he lived with and worked under Gandhi for 20 years. And the report is that he is the only living human being now that knew and worked with Muhammad Gandhi. He's going to be here. A couple weeks ago, he lectured at Yale, then at Berkeley. He's been over the country and around the world lecturing about Gandhi. And he's going to be here this weekend. And these brochures up here tell about where to go and how to learn his understanding of Gandhi.
How were you looking at? What are the times is our organization?
Okay.
Maybe 7 p.m. Friday night or Saturday.
Well, they've asked us to have a private reception for the board of the Arizona Interfaith Movement, and that'll be Sunday evening at 7 o'clock.
Oh, sorry.
But no, that's okay. If you cannot go at any of the time, consider yourself as a member of the board of directors of the Arizona Interfaith Movement and come and join us Sunday night at 7 o'clock, 7 to 8. And it's at the Holiday Inn on 48th Street. 48th Street.
Probably, I don't know if it's in the fire again.
Call us and we can tell you that wherever you be. But we'd love to have you join us. And if you can go to any of these other lectures, Friday night, Saturday morning, Saturday noon at 1, and Sunday from 1 to 5, and then our reception is going to be at 7 o'clock Sunday. So those who are here, then information about the Arizona Interfaith Movement and some of the projects are on this sheet. The next Faith Forum will be in this room on May the 15th, the third Tuesday of May. And that'll be the last Faith Forum until September, if we don't have it in the summer. The title of the Faith Forum a month from now is Texts of Terror in Scriptures of Faith. We have a rabbi, we have an imam, we have a Christian minister, each of them coming to say, all right, in our scripture, here are texts of terror. And those of us who are Christian, it's hard to admit that, but so be it. That's it. Those who are Jewish, it's hard to admit it, etc. But it should be a marvelous experience on May the 15th, 11:30. And those, that information is here. Also, on October the 23rd, it's Tuesday night, we're having our Experience Interfaith for 2012. Marvelous event for the Sikh community. We'll provide a Langar meal where we all sit on the floor to show that no one is higher than anyone else. And we'll have a couple tables for elderly and infirm, but should be a marvelous thing. So that's on the list. We're also then a couple of other things here. Golden Rule from a dozen or so different faiths. And then we have 3 books. Voices of Faith, number 1, 12 different faiths described. And it's not me as a Christian saying this is what the Hindus believe, this is what the Buddhists believe. Rather, we had a Hindu scholar, a Buddhist scholar, a Sikh scholar, etc. write the chapter about that. That's volume 1. Volume 2 is 8 more faith groups. And then, third book, Interfaith Inspirations for a Little Life, daily devotions for a year, every topic. So, for example, it might be hope, and on Monday it might be a Muslim writing, on Tuesday a Buddhist, on Wednesday a Christian, etc. A scripture from that faith group, paragraph or two of comments, and then a closing prayer. So that these are $20, and these are $18, I think. And there's information in our brochures. Thank you all for being here today, and we hope you have a wonderful